Lunch after some Carly and Mark, and we're here with Shane Joseph. Shane was on the show a couple years ago with the previous novel, After the Flood.
That's right.
And you got a new one here, Shane, which Natalie is holding up right now, called The Ulysses Man. And maybe let's just get a little background on this new book.
Sure. So this book is pretty much set in, I guess, modern times.
Like today?
Well, like between 1960 and about 2005. So in my lifetime.
Okay.
And it traces the path of an immigrant who leaves his native country, which was then called Ceylon, which is now called Sri Lanka, under some rather trying circumstances, because he's virtually pushed out of his country through various events that take place in his family life. You know, he's faced with insanity, alcoholism. There's the mob involved. There's a lot of things that sort of agitate to push him out. He comes to Canada. He tries to find a home here. He's very successful in business. You know, he starts and ends companies and makes a lot of money and then loses it all. And then, sort of disillusioned with everything, he goes back to Ceylon to see whether, could he make his life back there again.
Mm-hmm.
And he finds that country has changed. You know, that country is now wrecked with a tsunami. There's a civil war going on.
You can't go back.
Can't go back.
Right?
Yeah. And so then he comes to the conclusion of where home really is.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I call it the Ulysses Man, because it's modeled on the journeys of Ulysses, who was a big influence on this character's life. And at the same time, Ulysses himself was traveling for years, trying to get back home from the wars, right? And ultimately, when he got home, home was not home. He had to fight for his new home and regain it. So that's the kind of the metaphor there.
You know, it's interesting. We just last week we had some couple of guests on the show. In fact, they put on an event yesterday at the N-Wave Theater down in Harbourfront, and it was all about the same theme, the theme of what is home.
Mm-hmm.
And they're from Iran originally, and now they're here in Canada. And their whole project is all about meditations on, what it is. What does home mean? What does it mean to be home? Where is home for anybody?
In home, in my conclusion is that home is really a state of mind. It's a collection of all the things you've done in your life, things you're able to assemble back and surround yourself with, and that becomes home. And that can change, right? Home is never a permanent place. That business of living happily ever after is fiction, right?
When will that change?
When will that change?
When will it not be fiction any longer, and we can actually all live happily ever after?
I don't know. I don't think that's the fate of humankind. I think we are constantly destined to keep, journeying. And then it's the journey is the purpose of life, I guess, on Earth. The arrival is when it's done.
Yeah.
When you leave.
So, so tell us a little bit more about this journey that you're. Who's the principal character in this book?
His name is Martin James. He's a Sri Lankan burgher. Now the burghers are a minority, a leftover fragment from colonialization. Right, so Ceylon was a Portuguese colony for 150 years, and a Dutch colony for another 150 years, and then a British colony for another 150 years. And so 450 years of colonialism left some European remnants in the country. They got independence in 1948, and then things started to change around the 60s when the language laws were becoming more restrictive, and people had to study the local language, which is Sinhala. And a lot of people who had been on the margins, the minorities, who had studied in English or were Christians or what have you, started to leave the country. A lot of them emigrated to Australia, to England. Some came to Canada. And so this whole business of departures started to take place. In Martin's case, of course, he couldn't go anywhere because his parents, his mother was mentally ill, and his father was a bit of a drunkard. And he couldn't get past to go anywhere. So he had to make his own way. And he capitalizes on the ethnic troubles that took place in 1983, when the Tamils and the Sinhalese were fighting.
Mhm.
And he kind of jumps ship and smuggles himself into Canada. Now, I'm not going to go beyond that point, but that's the baggage with which he comes to this country, and then he has to try and make it his home, which he does. I mean, he's quite successful. As I said, he starts and ends companies. He gets married to a very rich woman, but the certain things don't escape. You think you leave the old country and you leave the baggage behind.
Mhm.
So he escaped alcoholism and he escaped mental illness. When he comes here, his wife, who he's married, this rich woman, ends up mentally disturbed. And he himself ends up an alcoholic.
Mm.
So the moral of the story is you can't really run away from some of these things that you come along with, and you have to come to terms with them rather than try to run away from them. So that's what happens. So he's constantly trying to come to terms with these demons that keep following him.
That's kind of interesting because you mentioned running away. Well, one of the things we often run away from is we run away from home, right? So here he's running away from one home and he's finding the same problems in another home.
Exactly. The moral of the story, obviously, is that the grass is not greener on the other side. It's just different grass.
But they keep telling us it is, or it looks greener. So, I mean, what does that mean for us? Maybe we should stay where we are.
Yeah, I mean, I went back after 21 years and I met a lot of my old friends who were back in the old country. And some of them had done extremely well. They'd rolled with the punches. Some of them hadn't really done well, but quite a number of them had done extremely well. And you could argue that, had you stayed, or had you left, self-realization is the thing that you're finally aiming for. Whether you leave or whether you have to, you stay in the same place. And in fact, in this book, there is a bit of that reconciliation because he does face up to people like his mother, for instance, who never left, and his father who never left. But they also reach some level of, self-enlightenment through being in the one place, whereas he had to travel all over the place to try and get there. And there's an argument to be made that you could probably stay in the same place. Your kind of mental horizon may not broaden, but your internal life may still deepen if you're introspective and reflective on the things that are happening to you. Plus, in that country, with all the violence and all the disruption that took place, it's a very fertile ground for self-reflection. You keep wondering, my God, what's happening here? Why are these people being killed? And it does provide, I guess, the fuel for introspection.
Now, you mentioned to some extent this book is autobiographical.
Well, I'm trying to say that it is not. Yeah. I want to say it is not because, for instance, Martin James is not me. I make that very clear up front. It's a work of fiction, but it's based on historical incidents that took place during a certain time period in which I was growing up. So the backdrop is real. The characters are fictitious. And it would have been unfair for me to have written an autobiography because, first of all, I don't think anyone would have been interested. And you tend to upset a lot of people when you write autobiographies because some people are represented well and some people are not represented well. This book takes everything that happened and all the people and incidents that we faced and mixes it all up, right? And so the people you see in these books are kind of amalgams of perhaps 5 or 6 real people. And in that way, you get more freedom to roam as a fiction writer because you can tell a story in the way you want to tell it, not the way in which it happened. So yes, I do agree that there are certain incidents, certain historical incidents that are true, and you can't make up history. History has already happened. So against this backdrop, these characters, who are fictional characters, play out.
Now, it mentions on the book here that Martin James, who's the protagonist of the book, is a true Canadian.
Yes.
What does that mean to you? What's a true Canadian?
It's a good question because I remember when my younger son was grade 5 or 6, one of those grades. They have this thing in school where they have to go to, the teacher asks the students to say, okay, who are you, where are you from, where are your parents from? And so that kids were getting up and saying, well, I'm I'm Canadian, my parents are Indian, or I'm Canadian, my parents are Italian, and it's a fairly easy connection to make. Well, my son was, born in the Middle East. His parents were Sri Lankan, of Dutch origin, living in Canada, and he was really confused. So he gets up and says, "I don't know. I'm like mixed up." Or something. And he comes home very frustrated and he tells me, he says, "Dad, what am I?" And I said to him, I think you're a real Canadian. Because, you embody a lot of the influences that are out in the world that have now all come to Canada and have all tried to make this their home. So I guess why I called him a true Canadian is that he has left somewhere. I mean, we've all at some point, whether it's 4 or 5 generations back, have left somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So he's his first generation. What he's left is very vivid in his mind. He's left somewhere. He's come here, and he's committed to making a life here. He's not saying, home is always where I came from. He's trying to make a life here. He tries his damnedest. He succeeds and he fails, and then he goes back thinking, maybe I should check out the old place to see whether it's still home. And he finds it is not.
Mm-hmm.
And then he makes a true commitment to come back. He accepts all his sins, and there's a few sins that he's left behind. He's got some illegitimate children and some broken relationships, and he's got a whole bunch of, things that he's got to fix. He's got a son who's seeing a shrink. He's got a few things he can't run away from those. And he accepts them all, embraces them all, and says, "This is my home, and I'm committed to it." So I think in that sense, I came here as an immigrant when I was in my early 30s. I had 2 young children. I had left a good job. I came and I went looking for a job, and they said, "Well, you don't have any Canadian experience." I said, "Well, I have a degree, and I have, I worked in the travel business, which is where I was at the time. And the best job I got was in a back room doing some stripping of tickets and stuffing envelopes and things like that. But I moved. I still said, I'm not running back. I came here. This is what I got. I've got to now take it from here and go somewhere else." And I did. And my career progressed. I moved into some fairly senior positions in my career. And then I also made choices to say, okay, now I have to do other things. So I think that's the Canadian way. It's a good way.
Just curious, why did you choose Canada?
That's a good question. I had always wanted to go to Australia. I make no bones about that.
We all want to go to Australia.
Yeah, well, that's because, because I had family there, who had immigrated years
For me,
before.
it's because of the kangaroos.
Oh, well, that too. But you can't find them, though. They're very difficult to spot. They run.
They jump into each other's pocket.
That's right. Well, anyway, I wanted to go there. I actually spent some time in Australia when I was in my teens and really liked it. But, it was a much more restrictive immigration policy there. It was very difficult to get into. And then, I wanted to go to the United States. That was also equally difficult. I was on a trip I went from the Middle East to Sri Lanka for my grandmother's funeral. And it was a spot trip. It was like I was going on a Thursday, I was coming back on a Friday. Okay, I flew in, and I was sitting down in the airline office, I think, and I was reading this newspaper that said, this is back in 1986, that Canada had opened its doors to immigration again. I said, Canada? I've never been there. It's a cold place, and they
Very
speak
cold.
French,
Yeah.
and I don't speak French, right? So I thought, no, but I've got to check it out.
Yeah.
And so I came here in that year, and I loved it. I stayed in the Royal York. I did all the touristy things. I went up to Casa Loma and Niagara Falls, and did all the things. I said, this is a fantastic place. Why didn't I think of this before? Because it had this colonial British thing, which we were raised in, and it was very American in that sense, and yet it was Canadian. It was different, right? And so I went back and I applied, and within 6 months I got passed. It was complete, and I'd been knocking my head in Australia for years, and waiting in a waiting list to go to the United States for 6 or 7 years. This just fell, and I said, you know what? This is saying that I got to come here, right? And I did, and and we did well. I mean, it wasn't smooth sailing. I mean, I have to tell you, there were times where there were rough patches, a lot of rough patches, which I think, sometimes has shaped even the book, because you got to fend for yourself, right? But then I found my rest of my family moved over. I have my brothers and their families are here. My in-laws are here. I have My children are here, my parents are here. They all kind of emigrated, and they all did well. They all worked here, and they all retired. My dad's retired, and he's doing well. So yeah, I think, yeah, this is a good story.
Now, so you mentioned your career, but also, regardless of your career, you've made the decision to do some writing. What is it that compels you to write?
Yeah, that's another very interesting question. I was a writer when I was in my teens. I mean, I used to write short stories, and I had the good fortune of being able to work at the local broadcasting corporation, where they would broadcast my stories. And I had a few stories published in magazines, and I mean the literary output of the country was very small. So I was kind of fortunate that I was in the right place. And that kind of fueled me to write more and more. And then when I was about 23, I ran out of ideas, because what can you write when you're 23? Teenage angst and some, stuff like that, right? So I stopped writing for about, 20-something years. And then about 12 years ago, this thing came back to me to say, I think you've got to go back to doing what you always wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, I was doing a fairly good job, and there was no way I was going to leave that day job to do this. So I kept writing, and I had about, this is my 4th book, so 4 books out. I still can't make a living out of it. I don't think a lot of writers in Canada can make a living out of it. Although, having done the writing, I realized that it addresses another side of my life. I mean, the right brain, the creative side.
Yeah.
Because the left brain is the analytical side, right? Which in business, and I'm a business consultant by profession, you always analyzing spreadsheets and looking at projections and profit and loss statements and all that stuff, which is fine, but it's kind of one-sided.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the imaginative side, where the child, where you're allowed to run free, and roam, and play. And the best ideas sometimes come when you're doing this. Because I worked for about 10 years in product development, and product development is about building new products.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about coming up with the ideas of what products will people use. Because product development is, I think you go on the basis that you create 10 products and 9 fail and 1 might stick. You got to play. You got to experiment. And so the writing helped, definitely, because I was playing and I was coming up with ideas, and so I think that the two really helps to balance a person out. And if you I think we all can do this. Some of us just don't bother to explore that side, whether it's writing or painting or singing or doing something artistic. The idea of releasing the child in you and playing, I think is a good thing. We should do that.
Now, we didn't talk about this beforehand, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you want to read? Is there something you could read from the book, just to give us all a flavor?
Sure, I can read. I have to qualify that some of the earlier chapters are pretty dastardly, because...
Dastardly in what sense?
Well, because these are the conditions that create the push for the young boy and the young man later to leave his country, right? And so I'll read you the first couple of pages of the first chapter, which is titled, "Do They Shoot Dogs in Canada?" Okay, now this is set in Sri Lanka in 1961, when Martin is 6 years old. Okay, so Martin James's brother Paul was born 2 days after Easter in 1961. Martin remembered the strange antiseptic smell of the hospital when they visited Mum and the baby. And the smell hovered over the infant even when Paul was brought home, despite the talcum powder and the lotions they poured over him. Paul's arrival saw his parents shift focus from Martin, until then their only child. They looked distracted, for the baby was colicky at night. They quarreled. Dad slept in the spare room, as he had to go to work the next day, and Mum cried often as she lulled Paul to sleep and stuck a sucked-out breast in the little bugger's mouth. Martin didn't like Paul much and couldn't understand why everyone fussed over him. Dad stopped reading Martin his favorite Western comics at bedtime. Dad had stopped reading comics altogether, his one pastime. Dad was so busy. When they took the baby over to Grandma's for the official showing after the christening, Jess the mixed Alsatian had just littered again. Jess's litters varied as different dogs crept over the fence to mate during her heat periods. The pups were golden-hued this time, and one lively fellow caught Martin's attention. "I want to take him home." Martin cradled the pup and announced firmly to the shrinking pool of aunts and uncles who were cooing over Paul and passing him around like a rare commodity. Many extended family members who had already emigrated to Australia or Canada would never see Paul, and others in the room, but in process, would probably see him just this once. Dad looked up, embarrassed, and stared at his older son. "Let's talk about this later." "No, I want him today," Martin said, barely holding back his tears. Grandma stepped into the fray. "Oh, let him have one, child. I was going to put these creatures to sleep anyway. Jess is a puppy factory. The pups grow up and come back to mate with her, and it goes on and on and on." So as Mom and Dad coddled Paul in the taxi, Martin petted the little pup in his arms, naming it Goldie, before they got home. I'll read another small page, if that's okay. This is where the connection with Ulysses and Odysseus comes into play.
Okay.
He's still, now the pup has grown into a full-fledged dog. You know, Alsatians are pretty big guys. And so it's probably about 6 to 8 months later. Martin yearned for the long walks he used to take with his mother before Paul arrived. For the stories she read him on those walks when they would sit in the shade of the coconut tree where the river skirted the southern end of Pereira Gardens. She had been an English teacher briefly before she married and then stayed home to raise Martin. Her favorite books were Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. Martin was captivated by the courage of Hector and Paris, but Odysseus, or Ulysses as he was otherwise known, was his real hero. Not only was he brave, Odysseus was also cunning. Martin missed laying back in the grass and looking up at the sky between the waving coconut fronds, listening to his mother's animated voice conjure up scenes of chariots and sword fights and monsters, hearing the yells of men locked in mortal combat, feeling the gush of blood and smelling the sweat of human endeavor. One day when Sita, she's the servant, was in the garden watering the cannas, keeping an eye on Paul, who was kicking and sucking his rattle on the blanket spread on the lawn, Goldie ambled over. The dog sniffed and drooled on the baby. Sita dropped the hose and screamed at the animal. She threw a twig at it. Goldie snapped at her viciously. Part of her frustration, Martin realized, was that the dog had been active in the garden recently and had pissed on the plants several times. The ayah then kicked the animal, spewing her broken English. "Ayo, what happened? This dog biting now, huh?" Martin quickly sprang to Goldie's aid, fearing that Sita might stone it next, like she had done with Gunadas's dog, when the old widowed accountant had watched Sita bathing at the well in her Dheeredha one day. On that occasion, Martin stumbled on her, soaping herself slowly and deliberately under the wet cloth, while the accountant grinned by the fence and his dog barked as if in heat. Upon seeing Martin, Sita had quickly retrieved her hands from their sensual self-ministrations, picked up a stone and hurled it at Gunadas's dog, shouting, "Paraballa!" while the accountant shuffled off smiling. Now as Martin pulled Goldie away from Sita, he sensed the agitation in the animal. It roared and snarled, and the dribble was thick on its tongue. That night it barked a lot, and Dad got up several times shouting, "That bloody dog! What the hell has got into it?" I'll stop there. I'll let you find out what
Sounds
has got
good.
into the dog.
Was it one draft from start to finish, or did the story change like a lot as you were writing it?
Well, I first started writing it as little episodes, as a collection of short stories. In fact, that first
So
story...
you didn't want it to be a novel at first?
I was trying to capture the incidents from my life or from that period. And so I wrote it as little short stories. This one was published, Do They Shoot Dogs in Canada? Short story was published as a short story.
Okay.
And then when I had these various episodes together, I said, no, this is not a series of short stories. This has got to be a novel. So then I had to go back in the second draft and rewrite it to patch them together. So there would be pieces from one story connecting with the other. And I liked it better that way. So yeah, it starts with, little vignettes, little episodes, and then gets into a full-blown novel.
And how long does it take? Like, how long did it take to put this on?
To write? Oh, this one probably 5 or 6 years. Yeah, I mean, I stopped writing this back in 2008. I'd finished the book in 2008, and then I was, you know, you get into the next stage of trying to find who's going to publish this, right? And I mean, I had an offer once, which was, I thought, quite hilarious. There was an agent who will remain unknown who said to me, "I'm prepared to sell this and publish this if you would change the protagonist and the setting from Sri Lanka and Canada to India and the United States." You know, I mean, obviously big market, bigger sales potential. But I said, no, I with conscience, I can't do that because they're two different countries, two different cultures. I was writing about these cultures. I can't just take them and flip them over.
No.
So I said no, and obviously, you know, I passed. So that process took a while. And then this year we decided, okay, we got the right publisher and we were going to publish the book, and so it's coming up.
And so do you want to keep writing books? Because this is the second one.
Oh, this is my fourth.
Oh, the fourth.
Yes, my fourth. Yeah, no, I will be writing. In fact, I've written about 5 more novels.
And you just have them sitting there?
They are what I call marinating right now. You know, you write the draft, or 1 or 2 drafts, and then you let it sit, and then you go back to it after a year or 6 months, and you say, now, do I still want this published? In fact, there's a couple of books that I've written that I probably will not have published because, you know, I don't like them now, you know, and they took a lot of effort. They took me, you know, 7, 8 months to write a draft, but I've moved, right? So I think, no, it's not. The one I really want to write is actually a prequel, which I've actually written about my ancestor, my first ancestor, who came from Europe to Ceylon 225 years ago. And he had a very interesting life. He was a mercenary soldier, you know, and he came out of the French Revolution and the Reign of Terror, and he had quite an adventurous life in France, and then in South Africa, in Cape Town, and then in Ceylon. And
Sounds like a swashbuckler.
Oh, it's a potboiler. Yeah. So
Is it the same as a swashbuckler?
Yeah, I've actually done the research on it. I spent time in France last month, going to the places that he was in, and looking at the streets and looking at the mountains on the side and saying, you know, what would I see when I get up in the morning, and doing that kind of, you know, point research. So I've got the information, and I think that's probably what I will publish or have published next, because I think that book is ready.
Well, we look forward to that one. Now, this one here, you're going to be you got a couple of release parties planned.
Yes.
The first
one's in Coburg, because I live there. So it's on the 26th of October at 7 p.m. At a nice little coffee shop called Meet at 66 King East.
Meet at 66
King East.
King East, which is probably the address to it.
Which is the address. And it's a very nice, very quaint, very colorful coffee shop, which is quite the watering hole for all the poets.
Is it as colorful as our background?
Yeah, it could be. I guess it could be.
It could be.
At times, depending on when the owner changes the decor. But it's a well-known watering hole in Coburg, and known for all the poets meet there and the writers meet there. And so I've had my previous book launches there. So it's going to be there, and I'm doing it in conjunction with another writer who's launching his book at the same time, Brian Mullally, who's launching A Patch of Blue. That's a collection of short stories. And then we have a date planned in Toronto for the 13th of November, 3 o'clock in the afternoon at the Rivoli.
Well, that's a pretty...
That's a neat place, yeah. I know.
Yeah.
I did After the Flood there 2 years ago, and that was, we had a full house. It's a small place, and so it looked pretty packed.
No, was that your idea, to have it at the Rivoli?
Oh, yeah. I had it at the Rivoli, and I actually had my son, who's a rap singer, come and do some rap songs about the end of the world. So it kind of worked really nicely.
Well, the last time, because your book After the Flood was kind of an end of the world.
It's a dystopian type of thing.
Now is he really?
He's still doing music. Yeah, he's I don't know if you like to see him sometime, but he is doing music. He's producing, and he writes and produces his own music.
Is he going to be performing at this?
I don't think this one. This one I'm thinking of getting my own band or a combination of, because I play music as well. I play in a band. And I have various combinations of musicians that I would probably...
What instrument do you play?
I play the guitar, and I sing.
Wow.
Yeah.
That
Can-
sounds like
do you
fun.
ever need a
You should
bass
do that.
player?
We have.
She's my agent.
We have the full complement right now, but you know, you never know, right? Things change. I mean, I've been playing in this band for the last 12 years, and we've changed over about 6 times.
What's the name of the band?
The band's called Think Red.
Think Red?
Think Red, yeah.
You
Where
should
did
bring the
that-
band on sometime,
We should bring
Shane.
our band. All right, I'll tell them. I'm meeting the guys tonight. I'll let them know that that you're interested. And yeah, we play at dances and parties in the GTA area and in Coburg and right along the lake.
I like the name. Think
yeah,
Red.
yeah, it's good. Yeah, we play the music from the from the 60s through to today. Again, it's the same
Same
the time
thing.
zone, and so on.
Now, can anybody show up to these openings, or do you
Oh,
have
absolutely, absolutely. It's open to anyone. Please do come out. Buy a copy of the book or books. There'll be readings, and and hopefully I get to meet folks and meet the publisher, and go on from there.
to? Sounds like fun. So, and if people do want to get and stay in touch, or maybe they want to order the book online, can they do that?
The
Do you
book
have a
is
website?
available through Amazon.com, all the online stores, Barnes and Noble, Chapters. They can go into a bookstore and just give them the name of the book. I'm not sure this is going to be mass stacked in all the stores, but if they give them the name of the book and the name of the author, it can be ordered. But it's available online. I'm planning to have an ebook version of this released early in the new year,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that medium is catching on. We wanted to start with the tree book first,
Yeah.
and then get to the ebook later. Yeah.
Okay. And do you have a website where people can get
Yes,
in
they
touch with
can
you?
get information from me at www.shanejoseph.com. Easy to remember.
Yep.
And there's information on the books. In fact, I think as your previous interview is probably still there as well, from the last time we talked about after the flood. I had bits of that loaded up there as well.
Well, that's great.
Yeah,
Well, listen, Shane,
Yeah.
thanks for coming back
Yeah.
and tell us about
Thank
this.
you for
and
having me.
sounds like it's going to be a lot of fun in November at the Rivoli and October 26th in Coburg. So, and you'll have to come back and tell us about the next one.
Oh, I will.
Or
That-
come back
the
with the band.
swashbuckling pot boiler
I'll come back with the band. That's a.
and the band too.
All right.
Think Red.
Think Red.
Okay, thanks, Shane.
Thank you.
And we are. I think that's it for the show, Nat.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah,
we-
I'm interested in the band now. For your band to come back, Think Red.
Yeah,
So.
I like that name.
Wait,
Because I play in a band too, Shane.
Oh, you
I
do?
You know,
Oh,
I
you
play
do?
bass and but we can't come up with a name.
What were some of the names that you've had
Well,
before?
we were Shade before. It was a
You were
take on
Shane before?
Shade, S-H-A-D-E.
Oh, I thought you were Shane.
It was based on the Shadows because we started with the Shadows music, that was the Shadows music and all that stuff. We played a lot of that stuff, Cliff Richard and all that, and then we moved from there. And then Think Red became a more contemporary name. And yeah, we had a good time. We had a good time with the band.
Yeah, so do we.
Yeah.
But we still can't come up with the name.
Flying Monkeys.
Oh, we had Monkey Dice was one of the names. Banana 14, Fudge Patrol.
Fudge Patrol.
What music do you play?
Oh, we play.
Heavy metal.
Heavy
We
metal?
play. Actually, too bad we didn't. What? I'm trying to read the message. I can't read it. It's when we play other people's music. It's classic rock type, from the '60s
Yeah.
through the '90s.
So you're in the same
But-
boat. Yeah.
But we do original stuff too. So
Good. Very good.
maybe we should do a concert sometime. Your band and my band.
Oh yeah, that'd be cool.
Good time. That's
Fudge
What kind of music
Patrol.
is your band playing?
Same type of music. I mean,
Oh,
we
rock
play,
music?
Probably play Neil Diamond.
Neil Diamond.
Yeah.
So you're a little bit on the softer side
the
because
softer
we're more like
Yeah.
Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, we have a few heavier songs too.
Yeah. Maybe we can have a competition. No, we'll just have fun. Okay, Shane,
Okay,
thanks so
all right.
much.
Thank
That's it for the show, Nat. So, we'll see you next week?
Yeah, next week.
Okay, all right.
Maybe they will actually have some more about that moon landing stuff.
The moon landing, although I think we pretty much proved it in our case today. So, anyway, thanks everybody for tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow at noon for more Liquid Lunch right here on ThatChannel.com. See you then.